Emperor Nero had a knife in his hand, pointed at no one but himself. Yesterday, he ruled the greatest empire on Earth. Today, he was its most wanted fugitive. History remembers Nero as a tyrant, a ruler consumed by excess, driven by vanity, and willing to crush anyone in his path. His reckless spendings plunged Rome into economic ruin, and his paranoia led to countless executions. Tired, the people of Rome revolted against him. With the Roman soldiers closing in, Nero sunk the knife into his flesh. His final words were, "The world has lost its greatest talent." History often looms like an unshakable monolith, vast, immovable. But look closer and you'll find it's built on small, profound moments. Words that shape the world. Some monumental, some satirical, and others downright hilarious. One small step for man, one giant leap for whom? To be, or not to what? This is the round table where we uncover the moments that made history unforgettable. What is history's greatest punchline? Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, let's begin this. This is kind of, dude, I'm kind of nervous. Like,
It's all right.
I've never done a podcast before.
We're not live, so you can like mess up, do whatever you want. Keep it casual.
Yeah. Welcome to History's Greatest Punchline. In this show, we explore history through the people who shaped it. These folks have left a lot of profound, maybe foolish, at times hilarious remarks, and by the end of this show, we'll invite you to help us rank what truly stands as history's greatest punchline. My name is Takumi,
My name is Bax.
and we're excited to start this new podcast.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to learn because I don't know anything about pretty much all of world history. I think like I know a little bit of United States history, but like I don't know anything about Japanese history besides like the stuff that you told me last year.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I think Japanese history is actually a very good starting point because when you go to places like Europe, where all these countries are constantly across history changed borders, like they appear across history, so it gets really complicated really quickly. Whereas Japan has kind of been chilling on this island for like essentially since the beginning of like early humans, and it has a much more linear history, for lack of a better word, than other countries or regions. So I think it's like a pretty good starting point. I hope after going over Japanese history, we could almost use the timeline, as something we could reference. So maybe it'll be like, during this time in Chinese history, the Japanese were doing this. Or like during this time in US history, the Japanese were doing this, since we've already covered Japanese history. Exactly.
Yeah. I just want to be able to hold like a conversation, you know what I mean? Because I think, especially with Japanese history, I think a lot of people probably like in Western society are fascinated by like Japanese culture and history, right? Everyone's like, oh, yo, samurais are so sick. All that stuff. They see it in like, you know, Shogun, like the show that we watched, and like video games and stuff. And
yeah, I think, like you said, there are like so many pop cultures that reference the Japanese tradition and culture, and you kind of get to understand where that came from, the roots of that, and it's gonna be a good time. We're gonna go through samurais, we're gonna go through like ninjas and all the things that people are probably gonna watch this show for, and I think it's exciting. Yeah, so Japanese history is split up to the Jomon period: Yayoi, Kofun, Asuka, Nara, Heian, Kamakura, Muromachi, Azuchi Momoyama, Edo, Meiji, Taisho, Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa period. And we're essentially just going to go in order of these, but today's episode will be about the Jomon period of Japan.
damn, Jomon. Jomon.
So, based on my research, before the Jomon era, there is technically the Paleolithic era, which is more of an era that encompasses like the entire world. Japanese history is said to start when like Japanese culture was first born. The Paleolithic era is said to have started from around 40,000 BCE to 14,000 BCE. So if you want to remember the Paleolithic era, which started in 40,000, you could remember as like literally like 40K or something. And you could also remember it as the age where Homo sapiens won against Neanderthals and all the other human species.
Whoa.
So that's pretty cool. 40K. This is also the time where humans, Homo sapiens, began using stone tools. And also all of the really old cave paintings are found around this time as well. So it's you could say it's like the emergence of art. Don't you think like now that you've heard all of that, 40,000 BCE sounds kind of profound? Like it's a pretty important date, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of important stuff going on around then. Is this like all happening all over the world, or is like including Japan, or is this just like like focused in one certain area of the world?
I forget the name, but the ones found in the Philippines, France, Africa, they all come from around this area of time.
There we go.
So another thing about this era is it is the Ice Age. It's the last Ice Age. And quite the opposite from today, where like things are getting warmer and the sea levels are rising. During this period, it was so darn cold that the sea levels were going down. And this causes land bridges to form. Much easier to get from like an island to like a continent and vice versa. And there are probably even moments where like they just walk over thick sheets of ice to get from point A to point B. So that's essentially how the Japanese people, the very first Japanese people, got to the Japanese island using these land bridges. And these Japanese people, or they're not technically Japanese people yet, they were chasing food. So these include like Namen elephants and Yabe's giant deer. They'd watch these animals migrate and they just chase them down. It's believed that there were two ethnic groups that poured into Japan. The ethnic group that came in from the south, they're called the Minatogawa people. And the other ethnic group was called the ancient northern Siberians, which they came through probably the Korean peninsula. But there were also like ways of going into Japan through the very north, through like Russia into Hokkaido. But based off of my research, they came in through the Korean peninsula.
The Korean peninsula.
Yep. And these people would mix and eventually become the Jomon people of Japan. A lot of people still go to Japan right now for food. And that's essentially like how the early Japanese came over to Japan as well.
How about that?
Yeah, dude.
I mean, Japanese cuisine. It's hard to get better than that. When I think of Japanese food, I immediately think of sushi. Is there anything like underrated?
Udon, ramen. Ramen originated in China, but we adopted that too, and adopted. We like the word adopted.
Japanese people, like, they do the whole like bowing thing. Are they usually very kind to like tourists and people from out of the country?
Bro, it's come to like a terrible point in Japan where like people began like pulling like cherry blossom petals off of trees, and essentially it's just like vandalizing Japan. And
tourists
Japanese
do that?
people, yeah, tourists.
Oh my god!
They get like excited, you know. They're like, "Oh, it's Japan, bro! I've watched this on TV show.
Yeah,
It's so cool." And then they get their hands all over, and yeah, and then Japanese people are like, "What the heck are these guys doing?"
yeah. I want to go to Japan one day, and when I do, I will be picking the no, I will be as respectful. If you think I'm respectful just now, dude, just watch.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be.
I'm
just gonna always be bowing. I'm just gonna be perma bowing.
You just don't have your head up the entire time.
It's just I'm looking at the floor the entire trip.
Bro, So I don't know. Maybe like they think that you're like making fun of them or something.
They totally will.
So I said from 40,000 BCE to 14,000 BCE was the Paleolithic Era. Around 14,000 BCE is when the Jomon Era starts. And I think a lot of people are now wondering, like, what changed? What's this distinction between the Jomon Era and the Paleolithic Era? And the distinction is actually pottery. So the Jomon people began making what we call Jomon pottery. Search it up now. The Jomon pottery. These pots are like some of like the most strangest looking, but also cool, very cool pots
Whoa.
that you've ever seen before. Yeah, they're gnarly, right?
Yeah, the designs are crazy.
I know. Jomon in Japanese literally means like cord pattern or rope patterned. You could see them in a lot of these photos on Google. There are these like cord patterned, rope textured surfaces on the pots. And we don't know why the heck these Jomon people decided to do this, but they did. And looking at that, early archaeologists were like, oh, let's identify these people as the rope patterned people.
The
And so that's what
Jomon
Jomon
jar.
means. Exactly. For context, the Jomon people had an abundance of food. That doesn't mean like they were just like fat and that also came out wrong. That doesn't mean that they were all that doesn't mean they're stuffing themselves every day, but compared to other parts of the world, they were doing pretty well off because like aforementioned, all these animals came into the Japanese island, but around this time the climate got warmer and the land bridges began disappearing. So now the Jomon people were clearly isolated from the rest of the world, and it got harder for intruders to come in, and it became like this. It became an environment where the Jomon people essentially were able to hoard all of the food source in Japan for themselves. So they were like pretty good. They were pretty well off,
They
and
were set.
yeah, what happens when people are set is they begin getting free time. And what happens when people have free time is they begin making stuff. And that's probably how the Jomon pottery thing started.
There you go.
So it all like connects, you know. It's pretty darn fascinating.
Mm.
So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna break down the Jomon period to different epochs just to make things easier to understand. So everything from like the start, the 14,000 BCE to where we are now, is called the initial Jomon period, and this is 14,000 BC to 5,000 BC. And
Gotcha.
during this time, there was also a climate phenomenon called the Younger Dryas. Remember how I said like the world was getting warmer?
Oh, yeah.
God decided to just take that away, and a mini like ice age came back for a few
What?
thousand years, or like 1,000 years. And that really like got people suffering around this time. And the Jomon people were also part of that.
They got cold.
So if you ever heard of like the Younger Dryas, as reference, it happened during this time of the Jomon period. Okay, but like ultimately by the end, the warmth returned, and the Jomon people who were living in like caves and like the inner parts of Japan began coming out and would settle against like rivers and oceans, and they'd begin fishing, and they also began like harvesting acorns, chestnuts, and peaches as well. And that ends the initial Jomon period. That's still like 9,000 years, bro.
I mean, they did a lot, you know? Some good pottery. That must have taken a while to figure out.
So the initial Jomon period is done, and now we enter the early Jomon period. So this is 5,000 BCE to 3,500 BCE. Jomon people are interesting in that they're hunter gatherers. However, they still made settlements, so they settled in one spot, which is really rare to see. A lot of hunter gatherers from other regions, they're nomadic, so they move around a lot. Whereas the Jomon people, they just liked the place they stayed in, you know?
They just chill.
They made their own villages. Yeah, they're chill like that. Around this time, the bow and arrow was created in Japan. They were really flimsy bow and arrows, though, so they didn't really do the job of killing. But it is said that the Jomon people would paste what's called wolfsbane onto the tip of the arrows, which is a really deadly poison extracted from the flower. And they'd
Whoa.
like essentially hunt deers, big deers with those. Oh yeah,
Oh wow.
pretty intense, you know. Like that's also what I think about, or what I'm curious about. Like, at one point, do they figure out that this flower, the stuff that comes out of this, is actually poisonous?
I mean, I'm sure just some moron ate it.
They're like, oh
Like,
shit.
oh, don't do that. It's a sick name for a plant.
Yeah, wolfsbane
Wolfsbane.
is fucking cool.
That sounds like the name of like a sword. Okay, so their weaponry, that it was just limited to bow and arrow.
Bow and arrow. They also had stone tools, stone and bone tools. I'd post a photo. You could also search like Jomon stone tools. They're like pretty like, yeah, that's what I imagine stone tools to look like. But
Yeah, yeah, I'm
you know,
looking at it right now. It's a pretty flimsy bow, like you said. I'm seeing just a long stick, so I'm sure that they shoved that into things. Um,
so during this time, the Jomon pottery evolves too. They got like more and more creative, crazy with like the ornamentations. These Jomon pots would essentially be used as inventory, right? If you need to carry around something. And I'd also like to point out how they were essentially like a refrigerator too. They didn't have refrigerators back then, of course, but they still
no way.
needed like a cool space to put their like food in. So they'd like dig out holes and put the pots filled with these like food, like probably meat, and they just store it there because that the temperature down there is pretty cold.
Was it snowing a lot there back then?
Um, yeah, probably more so than now. Again, like this is like they're just getting warmer, probably not as warm as we're accustomed to. So it might have been, like you're saying, still pretty cold. So around this time too, another Japanese ornamentation was invented. They're actually sculptures, and they're called Dogu.
Dogu.
Dogu. The exact purposes of these we don't know, but they look pretty gnarly. Have you already like searched them?
Yeah, their eyeballs are all kind of similar. Those are eyeballs,
Yeah,
right?
I think so. It's cool to think if it was like actually based off of something like a creature that we've never seen, like we just don't know about, or if there was actually like, I don't know, aliens maybe, like stuff like
It
that.
it does kind of look like an alien. Like, the,
Dude, like who knows? Like maybe like an alien just like came down and was like, "Yo, what's up?" And then the humans were like, "Oh shit, it's God." And
let me sculpt
like
you real quick, bro.
so like said before, we're not like 100% sure what they were used for. They might have been used for like ritual purposes, maybe like something related to fertility. When archaeologists discovered dogus, for the most part, they didn't have a specific part of the body. So a very specific part of the body was destroyed. And
Hmm.
what archaeologists think is when, for example, your head hurt, to pray that it fixes itself, people would break the heads off of these Dogu dolls and pray that with the destruction of the Dogu's head, that their pain in the head would go away. And
Wow.
this applies for like hands and feet, you know? Anywhere that hurts, doesn't feel good, just break a freaking Dogu doll, and they believed like that will just fend all the evil spirits away.
I'm looking at this right now. Did you know that the Pokemon Baltoy and Claydol are based off of the Dogu?
But yeah, yeah, isn't that cool? Like Baltoy stuff we like know today are
Pop
actually
culture.
connected with things, yeah, made like thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
This also connects to religion in Japan. The Jomons believed in animism. So that's the belief that like spirits reside in like inanimate objects. And in detail, it is thought that the Jomon people believed that each object had a god in them, and these gods essentially possessed these objects, and they originated from heaven. And once the object breaks or ends, they would go back to heaven and they'd tell the other gods like how good Earth was. The better you treat your objects, the better reviews you get up in heaven. And the gods who were treated well would tell the other gods, bro, like Earth was kind of nice. You guys should come down too. And then the other gods are like, really? And then they'd come down and help with the recycling of nature, with providing humans with the necessary resources to survive.
Sweet.
Next, we hit the Middle Jomon period. So that is 3500 BCE to 2500 BCE. Now the Jomon people are beginning to make large houses.
Damn.
Most famously, the pit house. You could like search a photo of this Jomon pit house. It looks like a pretty nice house, you know? They'd make a wooden framework and they'd put like hay and a bunch of like other grass on top.
Oh, yeah. These look cozy. Like
yeah.
I could see you being pretty warm in here.
The Jomons were famously buried in the fetal posture. This is probably due to their religion as well. The bodies, very interesting, they would face the west, like kind of like ancient Egyptian art, right? Where the direction east and west is very prominent because east is where the sun would rise and then it will set in the west. Archaeologists also speculate that the Jomon people were afraid that by facing the dead body to the east where the sun rises, the dead would also rise with it. And isn't that kind of crazy?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like cool because, you know, today we're still scared of like zombies and stuff, right? And from like a very early stage of humanity, at least the Jomon people were kind of like, oh shit, I'm scared of the dead too. Like zombies, oh no, you know? So I think that's like a pretty cool connection. So another pretty interesting fact about the Jomon period is that the Jomon period was surprisingly peaceful. And I feel like, at least when I think about early human history, they're always like fighting over food resources. You know, we allegedly killed off the Neanderthals. But because, well, first, the infant mortality rate was so high, and also while they did have an abundant source of food, it wasn't like they were stuffing themselves every day. So they were like trying their best not to kill each other and bring the population down even more. And we know that there weren't many human killings because the skeleton skulls excavated and carbon dated from that time usually didn't have any bruises or fractures caused by like weapons penetrating the skull.
People were just dying, natural causes, disease.
Yeah,
stuff.
Usually just harsh environmental conditions. Again, it was probably much colder back then. Just malnutrition. The average life expectancy is said to be around 30 years for the Jomon people.
Jeez.
Yep. So you could see kind of like why reaching adulthood was kind of a big thing, right? Like, you're a kid, you have not a great immune system compared to adults, and you're living this harsh life. So when you finally get to an age where you don't have to worry about most things, or at least as much as a kid, it was a pretty big thing. And one very interesting detail that archaeologists found from skulls excavated from the Jomon era is that they were missing teeth.
Whoa.
And
like
this is
all of their teeth?
Yeah. Just like few on the front.
Oh, okay.
But the popular belief is that the Jomon people, once they get to a certain age, they'd congratulate themselves by pulling their teeth out.
Really?
Yeah. It's arbitrary of whether that was like coming of age thing or like marriage, but if there was like a big event, they'd essentially pull their teeth out, being like, these are harsh times. By experiencing the same pain together, we could come together as a stronger community. And so,
Oh, well, that's kind of sweet. I was wondering where that was
yeah.
going. Like, why would you do that? Congratulations. You're sweet 16, dude. Yeah.
Dude, do you think they all just like huddled around you as you like pulled your own teeth or something?
Oh my God. And like they make you do it yourself?
That I don't know. Maybe
I mean, that would
other
be
people
crazy.
did it.
Yeah. Bro, like I'd pull out my baby teeth like when they get loose enough, and that feeling of it popping out is like it's you just like stand there for a second. You're like, whoa, that felt really weird.
I remember this one time I had a wiggly tooth. I was a kid and I had to take a bath with my dad. And my dad was like, one day, like, hey, yo, could I just like see your wiggly tooth for a second? And then I was like, sure. And I opened my mouth and he was like kind of just observing it. And then out of nowhere, he sticks his pinky and pulls, and my tooth just goes flying.
Bro.
I didn't even cry because of the pain. I was just kind of crying because of like, what the fuck was that?
Why did you do that?
Why did you just suddenly do that to me?
And these guys are just doing it as celebration.
Yeah, crazy times, bro. Crazy. I'm so glad we don't do that today.
Yeah, I'm glad that one didn't catch on.
Yeah, imagine toothless being like the trending fashion. Like that's essentially what they were up to.
I mean, was it just like the less teeth you had, the more like well respected you were in the village?
I don't know. Imagine though, like, dude, that's so cool. You don't have teeth, man.
You just
I
have
wish
like
I could just like break off all my teeth.
the coolest motherfucker in the village walking around like
All the girls are like, damn, that's so hot. Anyways, but we're finally here. 2500 BCE to 300 BCE, the final Jomon era.
Jomon.
All right. So from around this time, the Magatama was created, and I want you to give that a search as well. Magatama. I think a lot of Japanese culture lovers, especially anime lovers, would recognize this symbol. These were also discovered in Korea, and we're gonna talk about that later too. But we already had some connections with the Korean Peninsula at this time.
When I like first looked at it, it reminded me of the like you know, like the Chinese, I think it's Chinese symbol of like it's
The
like
yin and yang.
Yin yang, yeah.
Yeah, maybe these are connected. I've got to research that, but now that you say it, and now that I'm looking at the Google photos, there are a few yin and yangs coming up too, so maybe they're connected, bro. You know, maybe let's do the research now. Why do Magatamas are thought to have originated from animal teeth or animal claws, and became symbolic of good fortune and protection against evil in Shinto traditions? All right. Yeah, makes sense.
It totally looks like a claw.
Okay, so this is actually pretty cool. I think in English they're called shell middens or shell mounds, and they're essentially ancient trash dumps. We have trash cans today. They just made like a mound full of trash. And over the years, erosion, shit happened, and they all just kind of got buried under the ground. And one of them is called the Omori Kaizuka. Before the discovery of the Omori Kaizuka, I don't think people even thought that Jomon era was a thing. I think what's interesting about this Omori Kaizuka is how it was discovered. It was actually discovered by this guy called Edward Sylvester Morse. And he came over to Japan to study the marine shellfish.
Right on.
And he was on his way to a place called Yokohama in 1877. And while on the train, he was just looking out the window and finds these like very distinct but familiar patterns on the wall. And it's like, wait a second, I think I think that might be huge. He leads an excavation team later on to go back to that very specific spot and begin excavating what the shells might be, only to discover that there were artifacts from a period that was long forgotten in Japanese history. But going back to 2500 BCE, around this time, another ethnic group called the Austronesians arrived in Sakishima Island. These Austronesians are famous for the Austronesian expansion. So if anybody's heard of that, this is around the time that happened. And for those who don't know what the Austronesian expansion is, essentially the ethnic group called the Austronesians, they started out in Taiwan, but would begin traveling all around the world. And one of the first stops was Japan. And a few of those Austronesian people stayed in Japan. During this time, there was another wave of intense cold, so that devastated the Jomon population as well.
Oh no, these guys can't catch a break.
Sure. And remember how we have like ties with Korea? How I said that we have ties with Korea even from like this point in history?
Yep.
So this is pretty cool. One day we might do a History of Korea series, but one of the earliest ethnic groups found in the Korean peninsula, they're called the Jomon.
Jomon.
But for a long time, Jomon and Jomon, even though they sounded similar, were thought to be very different ethnic groups. However, recently, it's been discovered that they in fact were related, and the Jomon were probably the Jomon who just branched off of Japan and moved into the Korean peninsula.
Oh, man.
However, at this time, the Jomon people didn't know it, but the Jomon people, one by one, were being slaughtered. They were being slaughtered by an ethnic group coming from the north, who would change their names multiple times throughout their course of invasion. But by the time they arrived to Japan, they were an ethnic group called the Yayoi people.
The Yayoi.
And that concludes the Jomon era of Japan, and the next era of Japan is called the Yayoi era. So,
I already don't like these dudes.
well, we'll see. We'll see. That's something you decide in the next episode. But
The
yeah,
Jomons, they held it down for a bit.
yeah, they were pretty chill. Like even when the Austronesians they came, Jomon people were like, okay, yeah, dude, just whatever, man,
Yeah.
do whatever.
They weren't killing each other. They were just, doing their little pottery and knocking each other's teeth
dude.
out. Having a good time.
Bro, they were just, yeah, I bet the Yayoi people came, and then the Jomon people greeted them by saying, Yayoi people were like, we gotta kill him.
These guys gotta go. I don't know what this teeth shit is, but it's not gonna go on for much longer.
Oh, fucking hell, there's zombies. Fucking hell. Final remark. If anybody is planning to go to Japan anytime soon and found the Jomon period really interesting, I highly recommend visiting the Sannai Maruyama historical site, which is located in Aomori Prefecture, so that's up north in Japan. It's gonna be quite a distance from Tokyo, but here you could see both a recreation and also an archaeological site of the Jomon settlements. If you guys are interested in how the Jomons were living and all sorts of stuff like that, do check out the Sannai Maruyama historical site. Alrighty. Okay. So, finally, what is today's punchline for you, Max? What was something that was the most profound from today's episode? It could be something you thought was funny, something you thought was kind of moving, or anything that stood out to you. What is today's punchline?
I mean, it's got to be the teeth. That's like the most thought-provoking thing. Like, what are we supposed to think when we find all these like human remains and skulls that are just like with no teeth in them, or just like teeth kind of taken out? It's like,
it's crazy. I agree. I think that's that's definitely a big part I got from researching about the Jomon people. So today's punchline is Jomon people pull their teeth out when they're congratulating something. Maybe we should get on that shit.
I think we should. Should we start that?
We should start that. By the end of the show, we'll be speaking like the Jomon people did. I hope you guys enjoyed this show, episode 1 of the Jomon period. We're gonna be talking about the Yayoi period next. I hope you guys have a great day, a great week.
If we get 2 likes, Takumi will whip out his teeth in the beginning of the next episode.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.